Yeah, the recording is on now. So in the STLC, the different phases, where are we at, what have we covered already, and what is that that's still left out? That's a few things I will first begin with, and then we'll move on to the test plan walkthrough. Now, I haven't explicitly had a topic or, a word to discuss in the vocabulary area, because today we are going to discuss a lot of words. In fact, we're going to talk about what exit criteria is, entry criteria is, test strategy is, estimate is. So there are a million, again, that's an exaggeration, but there's a lot of words that we are going to encounter via our discussion today. So that's why I did not feel like the explicit section has to be there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a complete walkthrough of a test plan document. This test plan document is for the Car project. Again, this is not project specific like yesterday. Now, yeah, the distinction between what we did yesterday and what we did today is that yesterday was a limited FRD functionality review functionality, where we are trying to understand the method more than the application itself. Today, we are going to follow the same lines. We are going to follow, we're going to understand the method that is followed to prepare a test plan. But since test plan is much more important to us than, of course, FRD is important, but test plan is an integral QA activity that we are, we have first-hand experience in. I mean, it is important to gain that first-hand experience in the test plan area. So that's why this document is excessive. So if FRD yesterday was limited in the content that it contained, the test plan, on the other hand, is excessive. We kind of prepared a test plan where every small aspect of what would go into a test plan is incorporated in there. So fair warning here, this is going to be slightly theoretical, but bear with me. Every minute that we spend on reviewing the test plan is really, really worthwhile. One way we can keep this part interesting is having a sort of, interaction. Bring in your questions, anything that, strikes odd to you, or anything that does not make sense, or if you just have a comment that you all would like to make, feel free to use the chat window or let me know and I'll unmute you, and we can make this part very interesting. Again, the practical scenario, I got all your test cases. Actually, the turnout has been amazing, and all the test cases I got had few minor corrections, not so much at all. So what I do have a list of few common problems that I have seen across everybody's work, so we'll discuss that. But the extent of our concentration on test cases today is limited, because test plan in itself is it's an output, plus it's an important 1/3 phase of your STLC. So today we will completely dedicate it to, understanding the test plan, strategizing, and all those things. Test cases would definitely be something that we will take up at the end. Padma, globalization, localization also at the end. Remind me please if I don't get there, but we'll take it. And I do have some questions that are submitted to me via emails. I did get a lot of them. So I will just, discuss those also at the end of the session. So that's how we will, conduct our class today. So let's get started. Now, again, as I said, we have to always go back and see our position in terms of where we are at in the entire STLC, the testing lifecycle, sphere. So the STLC has, we know that it has 3 phases: the test planning phase, the test design phase. So in the test design phase, we talked about how FRD document is reviewed as the first step to identify requirements, following which we write test scenarios, which is nothing but what to test. And following that, we've also actually seen how we write test cases, of course not in a great depth, but we have introduced ourselves, which is pretty much how to test. Following these 3 also, there are other intermediary steps in here, but if these 3 steps are complete in the test design phase, we can say that we are done with at least 75% of the test design phase. Now, test design phase, we know even though the primary activity that is carried out in the test design phase is, designing and strategizing how to test, we are also doing certain amount of planning, identifying the scope, getting much more insights into, the product and the process that we are going to use in order to test. So the outcome of the design phase is carried out to the test planning phase, even though that is not the linear order in which these phases appear. But nonetheless, test plan also benefits from the inputs that we get, or the insights that we get during the design phase. So here is a test plan, here is the design, everything. So and then finally is the execution. So execution is actually the test phase of SDLC. Now we know that unless 100% of planning and 100% of design are done, we cannot move to execution. So that is a dependency we are dealing with. So now that we have 75% done with the design phase, we haven't touched anything in the test plan yet. So we are going to step back, go above the design phase, which is the planning, and we are going to talk all about it, both as an activity and as an outcome in today's session. So to begin with test plan, always, or whenever you think about a process or or any phase in any activity, always think about when does this activity begin, what marks its end, who does it, how do they do it. So always the question words are very, very insightful whenever you're trying to learn a new concept. Similarly, let's do the same thing for the test plan phase. So here we are discussing the phase and not the document itself or the outcome itself. So input for a test plan phase, team, what do you think is the input? Any thoughts? Okay, let me begin. One of the inputs for the test plan phase to begin is that you need to have a business requirement document. Okay. Do you need a project plan? Do you think this is an input? Yes, to get the high level, schedules and effort and all of those things. Do you think functional requirement document, in other words, test scenarios or requirements? Yes, those are the inputs. So predominantly we have these three inputs for a test plan phase. Now, when do we start test planning? That is, what is the entry criteria for us to begin this? So once the project is in define phase, once these inputs are available, at least few of these inputs are available, not all of them, we can say that we can get started with the test planning phase. And always actors, the primary actor for this phase, or the person who is responsible, the team member who is responsible for the entire test plan phase, is the test lead. And what is the output? When do you say you're done with this phase? Usually there is no end to a test plan activity, because see, when we say that the test plan is done, usually when do you say it's done? When you are satisfied with its outcome, I mean when you know that you have included as much information as you can into the test plan, that is probably when you say you're done with it. But with the test plan, you will have to keep adding any information, any new information that comes up at any point of time. So typically test plan is a document that never gets finalized, that is always a work in progress, but you should have at least a working draft of it, something that is executable before the test execution phase begins. So the output, the overall output is that you will have a working, or at least a semi-finalized test plan document. So the output of the test plan phase is the test plan document. So test plan document as an outcome, we will talk about the document itself, in greater detail. So I have a document that is close to 20 pages, and I'll walk you through each and every item on it so that you'll get a better idea of test plan as a document and what does it contain. So this is a little bit of an input on, what the test plan phase is, and always remember that test plan phase is a continuous activity that does not end all the way until the test execution phase. There is really, it is not linear in any way, and the test plan document, which is the outcome or the output or the deliverable that is that is at the end, that gets generated at the end of this phase, is a dynamic document, which means you will have to keep updating it as and when changes happen, any sort of dynamic changing. Let's say, for example, the schedules have to be shrunk. That means if the testing was supposed to start on June 1st, but you started on June 15th. So that kind of update needs to go into your test plan, whether or not your test execution has begun or stopped or whatever it is. So it is a continuous activity. It needs to be maintained in order to be very, very accurate. And I hope when we take a look at the test plan document itself and walk through it, why do we have to do that becomes apparent. If not, just let me know and I'll try and explain that. So this is the test plan as a phase. Okay. Now let's talk about the test plan as a document. Now again, the in charge for that is the QA lead, and of course the QA team members will play a contributory role. Then the input for a test plan document is all the things that we've talked about, the scope, requirements and all that. The output is the document itself. So what do you think? I mean, we've talked about this briefly before also. So quickly, can you all just give me the constituents of a test plan? Contents. So I'll start with scope. Milestones. Okay. Version number if you test scenarios. So test scenarios and scope. Yeah. Okay. Schedule. Risks. Yes. Team. Size. So this is usually called roles and responsibilities. Number of testers. Okay. That so effort estimation. How many people, how many hours of work are we talking about? Tools, yes. Data, environment. Usually when we are defining the scope, it is also important to define what is out of scope. So test plan is a document where it is okay to be excessive, but then we are trying to establish a higher level of clarity with the help of this test plan document. So if there are any assumptions that the QA team is making, if there are any milestones, schedules, risks, roles and responsibilities, effort estimation, tools, data, environment, and we'll talk about manual versus automation in a little bit, Surabhi, but probably not the right time to discuss that. We'll discuss that today itself, but not yet. Okay, so these are the constituent elements of our test plan, and this is, I don't know if it still is, but this used to be one of the most commonly asked interview question team, and trust me, this was so popular that I always remembered in my mind that there were 11 things in a test plan. So to that extent, this question has been repeated time and over again, but slowly I've realized that, as long as you understand the dynamic and the process that goes behind creating of a test plan, there's really no need to remember that there are 11 items and, remember in the order in which they exist. But more or less, these are the constituent elements of a test plan, and we'll see what each one means when we, review this document. So Manish, you were talking about some item number. Were you referring to the version number of the document that we are picking up? Yes, that actually is a good observation, and there is a plan for that in the test plan to incorporate that as well. So we'll see that. So this is draft. Test plans most of the time are in the status of a draft because, as I said, they are dynamic documents and they keep, getting updated. Now here there's a revision and sign off sheet. So every time a change is being made, a kind of, a log is maintained to see where what kind of change has happened, who has made that change, on what date, if there's a version change happened to the overall document, all of that is tracked through the document history. Now if you ask me, do all test plans have all this? It is recommended to have all these sections, but not everyone will follow the same structure. Next comes the approvers list. So we will talk about approvers, whether or not there are approvers, if there are approvers, who they are going to be, all of that at the end of the session. At the end of our walkthrough on the test plan. But yeah, if there are any approvers, there is actually a table provided to record that as well. And then there is the reference documents. What documents are we going to use in order to what documents are we going to use as an input to get started and create the test plan? See, as I was saying yesterday, it is very important to pick the right version of the document if you want to, like, use it accurately and derive the, subsequent testing elements from it. So that is why when you're creating a test plan, it is very important to mention what version of the document or FSD. If you've used a TDD, BRD, if you've used any other reference documents, it is important to mention what version of the document was used in order to come up with the current document. Again, always take a look at the table of contents. It's very, very insightful. For example, you see here, this document will discuss what is the purpose of the document, what is the overview of the project, and who are the audience. And then next comes the test strategy. So there were plenty of questions on what test strategy is, how do we develop it, do you need an experience in this, so on and so forth. But if you can see here, test strategy is a part of the test plan document. So test strategy is an activity. Even when you look at it, so test strategy is both an activity plus an output, right? So like test planning is also an activity plus an output. So there's a test plan document, there's a test plan activity. Similarly, there's a test strategy document and there's a test strategy activity. So whichever way you look at it, test strategy is a constituent part of the test plan activity. So even in the document, if you see, test strategy is a subset of the test plan, and the test strategy will include information about how testing is going to be carried out. So this is not really project specific. This is about the product that you are looking at right now, and how are you going to go ahead and test it. See, a lot of times, let's say you are going to paint a room. Now you will probably strategize a little bit. Would you do it yourself? Would you hire a contractor? If you're going to do it yourself, what are the sequence of steps you're going to follow? That is basically strategy. Now planning would be giving a date or giving a certain budget, assigning a certain budget, assigning a certain time, giving a certain date. So all of that, you add in all of those parameters to your strategy, and that is what becomes your test plan. So test plan is always created over your strategy, and then test plan has specifics like this date, this much time, this much effort. Test strategy is the overall agenda or how you're going to deal with it. So you can say that. So for example, if you're supposed to do a mathematical calculation, I'm exactly at this point of time I cannot remember, but if there is a formula wherein you will have to do an addition first. So to derive at a certain solution or an outcome, you figured out that you'll have to do an addition first, and when you get the result you will have to multiply or divide or do whatever you need to do, further computation, and then you would arrive at the final result. So knowing that this is the sequence of steps you need to do, this is strategizing. But when you actually come and work on it, like say for example you're going to work on this on a Monday, and you need one person, you need inputs like numbers to add, so these exact numbers. So all of these exact parameters, if you are coming up with a plan on how to do this, that would become your test plan. Test plan has, I think this is a poor example, not really adding up. But does this make sense? Are you all able to get at least a sense of what test strategy and test plan are? Okay. Well, okay, so that's what is a test strategy. So if you look here, it is telling you what are the objectives, what are the assumptions, what are the principles, and all of that. So this is exactly about how you are going to test the application that you have on hand, like right this minute. But then, when you look at the overall test plan, it includes all the other things like environment and all of that other stuff. So as Emilio put it, test plan is more management and test strategy is more technical testing related. That is perfectly right. Now test plan, we cannot say it is not technical at all, because test plan includes test strategy. So we can say that test plan includes both the management and the technical information, but test strategy is limited to the technical information. Make sense? All right. So one more example. Okay, it's hard to give like a real world example. Let's talk about browser compatibility testing that we talked about yesterday. So we know that you need to test it on a Mac environment. That's the Safari browser. Are there any other browsers for Mac? I have no idea, so I'm just listing out what I know. Let's say there's Chrome, there's Internet Explorer, and then there is Firefox, something else. Okay, all of these browsers that you have to check on a Windows-based system. So you know that these are the list of browsers that you need to do. Now there are different ways to do this. One is you will test 100% all features on all of these. But is that optimum? You're going to lose a lot of time. You might not have that much time. So what would you do? You'll come up with a strategy that works. You'll break down your work into smaller areas. What you'll do is you'll choose a Mac because this is a different environment. You'll choose Windows. So you will test 100% functionality on one of these, browsers. And then for the rest of these browsers, you'll only do a sanity check to see if the most critical information is working or not. So you've come up with a strategy wherein you're breaking down your test platforms and you're breaking down, what browsers you're using and all that, and you're actually minimizing your work, maximizing your results. Now this would be strategizing. So this would be like coming up with a strategy on how to, test effectively in the shortest available time, all of those. Planning would be to assign a date, to assign a person to it. So on the Mac, if I say team member A is going to work and they're going to start on day 1 and go all the way through day 5, and then X amount of effort is going to be expended, this becomes your plan because this is your managing work, right? So how to work is your test strategy. How do you manage the work is your test plan. So test strategy is a constituent element of your test plan. So if you just write these dates, the test plan will not make sense. It should include how you are going to, apply these days to this kind of, method that you came up with. So test strategy is always a constituent element of your test plan, and test plan, in addition to containing the test strategy, which is the technical implementation on how to approach testing, it will also include the managerial aspects like how to handle your work. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, let's move on to the test plan document. Again, take a keen look at the table of contents, always very, very insightful. Now, one thing that I can talk about off the bat is here when we talk about scope and level of testing, there's UAT, there's functional, then there's exploratory testing. Now, why do you think UAT is part of this team? Do you think normally is that, do you think, without us going any deeper into the test plan concept, do you think UAT should be a part of a test plan that we're talking about right now? Okay. Okay. If that makes sense, we'll go further and, figure out if that needs to be there or does not have to be there or what. So the purpose of the document here, so this is something similar to what we've seen in the FRD document. It will give you an overall idea of how to consume this document, who is this written for, and what is it that you will find in here. So it will tell you that there is an test strategy, that is, how are you going to test it, start and end. So description of the process to set up a valid test. So how are we going to say when to start testing, when to stop testing, how are we going to create test cases, how specific tasks are going to be performed, all of that information you'll find in your test strategy. Now, execution strategy is how are you going to execute your tests, how do you find defects, if you find defects, what do you do with them, all of that, and then management. Now, like communications, escalations, risk, roster, all of that will be your test management process. Following that, there is a project overview. Now, if you remember, if you could recollect from our FRD review yesterday, this is simply an excerpt from our FRD document. So this is giving us a high level, setting a high level context for what we are going to test and what should be the final target, ultimate business target that this software system is expected to satisfy. And there comes the audience. Now yesterday, if you remember, the audience section was targeted at who the audience of the software itself are going to be. But here, this is actually, listing out who the test plan document is for. So if you see here, this is for the project team members. Now here we usually there is no distinction that is made as QA team members, because for us the QA itself is a project, because we are testers, and for us a testing project is just our project. So that is why whenever you see the project team members, it just means that QA team members. And then there is the project manager. So here all the roles and responsibilities are explained. Now the reason why we wrote this document in a way that it is it provides too much information is because we wanted you all to have a document that you can refer time and again, that will not be just one AUT specific, but it will be a sort of guide for you all to figure things out. So here the project team members will perform the specified tasks, provide input and recommendations. So this is what the QA teams does. So we were talking about how the QA team has a contributory role when it comes to the test plan document. So what kind of contribution is it? One is that we are going to perform the task that is performed here. We provide our inputs and we also provide our recommendations. But nowhere does it say that we are authorized as project team members to go ahead and make those changes, to go ahead and implement those recommendations on this document, because it's not our job. It is something that has to go through the intended owner, who is the QA team lead. The next thing is, it says that the project manager will plan for the testing activities and the overall schedule. They're going to review the document, track the performance, and approve the document and is accountable for the results. Now, project manager is accountable for the results. Do you think that adds up in the big picture? Why do you think is project manager is accountable for a QA team results? Do you think that adds up, team? No, Sandhya seems to think no, but the point is the project manager is responsible for the overall project, which includes the QA project. So that is why no matter what we do, no matter how independently we'll conduct our quality assurance activity, we are always accountable to the project manager and then eventually to the client. And then the stakeholders. So stakeholders are the clients here, representatives and participants. Yes, there's also a QA lead. Yes. Usually, the distinction between the project lead, QA lead and QA team member is not made. See, sometimes some teams don't have like a QA lead or something. So they'll say that they will say that one person is responsible for preparing the test plan, one person is responsible for overlooking the test cases, something like that. So you see, the ranking system is not as rampant as you would expect in an IT, especially QA teams. So isn't it the test QA lead? Absolutely. I mean, in fact, everybody is accountable for their own results that we produce. So if I'm supposed to write 10 test cases a day, I'm accountable for that at the end of the day. But when you look at it from a high level perspective, for the entire project and its well-being, for the delivery of the project to happen to the client successfully, the one person who is responsible is the project manager. So that is why they do have a say. They do have the task of overlooking how things are going, are we staying on schedule or not. That definitely falls on the project manager. So the stakeholders or the clients will perform the UAT test and ensure that the business is aligned. The technical team. So when we are talking about the technical team, this implies that we are referring to the development team, database team, operations, or the environment team. So any other teams other than the QA team. So the why, I mean, here in this section we are trying to list out how the different team members can use this document. So the technical team or the dev team can use this document to make sure that the test plans and the deliverables are in line with design, provides the environment and follows the procedures related to bug fixes. So what this means is, let's say I have decided that I'm going to start testing on June 1st, as I said earlier. Now, is this a decision that QA team can make alone? Now, by June 1st, we have estimated that we'll be done with 100% test case writing and we'll be done with 100% test plan document. But can we get started with QA just because we are ready from our end? No, because QA is a reactive job. We will always have to be in line and in sync with the other teams, especially the development team. So when we write a schedule or a milestone list in our test plan, this is something that needs to be, reviewed and approved by the technical team. Otherwise, they might not be ready yet to deliver the developed project, but if we plan to test that time, it will be a conflict of schedule. Similarly, you will have to check in with them and see the test execution time that you plan is apt for them also, because they will have to be available to do the bug fixes. So you see, test plan document is not only a way for us to record what we are going to do and when we are going to do. This is a way to communicate to the project manager, the stakeholders, the technical team, and the business analyst, everyone, to let them know how we are going to test, when we are going to test, what is it that we are going to test, so that we open up the communication channels and get their inputs as well. Finally, business analyst. Why is this document intended for business analyst? It is for them to provide their input on functional changes. So if for some reason you've identified a scope in a certain way and that is changing, the functionality is changing, or the extent of scope is changing. Let's say a function has been removed from the scope, a new one has been added. Ideally it shouldn't be, but we don't live in an ideal world. Things do change even at the last minute. So if they do, business analysts are the one who needs to let us know. Now this is pretty generic. This is not specific to any project. So anytime you are in doubt on what is the role of any other team member with respect to a test plan or a testing activity, this will be a good point of reference. You can always go back. The only thing is, remember that the project team members are, it stands for the QA team member. That's all. So yeah, that's it. And yesterday we talked about a 3-point rule on how to determine whether a document is a deliverable or not. So one is it an FYI to anybody? Do we need anybody's inputs on this? Or do we need anybody needs to review or approve this document? So can we apply this 3-point rule to the test plan document and determine? So what do you think test plan is? A deliverable, yes or no? Yes. So for the development project managers, all of them, this is an FYI document. So for the review, it is the business analyst. And this is an input also for the QA team. So since it satisfies in all of these three categories, test plan document is one of the primary outputs that QA team generates and shares it with all of the other teams. So it's not just important to create a test plan, but it's also important to share with all the other team members concerned and get their inputs on it as well. So is this a standard format for a test plan which is followed by all or most companies? That's a good question. So for all my projects, this is the exact same test plan that I use, and I've been doing so for the last few years. So this is pretty much the standard. Usually test plans, if not for an agile project, they are Word documents and they more or less have the same constituents. Again, it is always content over format. So if you feel like another format works best for what you plan, what you have in mind, you are free to do that, but make sure that all the constituent elements are in place and they are incorporated. So I'll show you a few neat things about this test plan document as we go forward. And you might be wondering, do we have to write all of this stuff every time we write a test plan? And we'll answer that also when we go forward. Test objectives. Here it says that the final product of the testing is twofold. One is you will have a production ready software, and the other is you will have a test of set of stable test scripts that can be reused for functional and UAT test execution. Does the second point make sense, team? Right. Um, so when we are testing a particular software, we have the AUT, and while you're doing, in the system test phase, while you're performing the functional testing on this document, on this application, what is the end result? When would you say that the system test is done? When you have a software that is ready to go live, right? So one of the primary outcomes of the testing phase is that you would have a production ready software. On the other hand, how are you testing this? Using the test cases, correct? So once you have used these test cases in order to test this AUT, these test cases have been, they stood the test of the time, and they have proved themselves that these can be effectively used to test the AUT. So these are pretty much stable versions of the test case document that you will be able to use in order to run tests on this AUT again. So not only do you have a software that is ready to go live, you will also have a test set that you can use to test this application. Now, what is the use of this test set? Because testing is already done, what am I going to do with this? So let's say this is version 1. What if there's a version 2 and you will have another AUT? Would you write test cases for the entire application again, or just for the new functionality? You would write only for the new functionality, but to perform the entire regression testing on this, you would again use this stable test case test set that you used for version 1. So at the end of the testing, the main outcome would be a software that is ready to go live, but the secondary outcome would also be a set of stable test cases that can be used for further functional testing or for the UAT testing. So any form of regression, you can use these. Make sense? Okay. Next is assumptions. Assumptions are a very important part of a test plan document. The reason why this is important is because, as we were talking about yesterday, people are under the impression that testing just means having the application right in front of you and pushing some buttons and seeing if there are any problems. There is a really lot more to testing than people realize, and we cannot blame them that they're not seeing it, or nor can we come to the conclusion that they're ignorant, that they don't know this. Now, why wouldn't they know is, instead of thinking why wouldn't they know, think about what is the reason why they really wouldn't know. It's because we are the subject matter experts when it comes to quality assurance. So you cannot expect an external team to understand how we conduct our business. So when it comes to that, you probably don't know how developers develop their code. So that is why, but then testing becomes, see, however the developer decides to develop their code, it does not matter to you, because at the end of the day, what you're interested is in an executable product, right? But then what the testing team does, how the testing is conducted, or what kind of results they're seeing is an important is a matter of interest to everyone. The reason is, see, when I am testing, sorry, I forgot erasing it. So when I'm testing the AUT, I'm validating the business analyst's work. Has the business analyst understood the client's requirement correctly, and were they able to give them a correct business model or not? I'm also validating the developer's work. I'm seeing whether or not the developer has, tested it or built it right, unit tested it right, developed it right. So when I'm talking about the development team, obviously there is the database team that plays a part, the environment team that plays a part. So inbuilt, I'm actually validating these people's work also. And I'm also validating if the project manager has planned correctly or not. Do we have enough time to test? Did we set the right testing standards? Did we set the right, legal agreements with the client or not? All of these are going to be, so all of all the people's work preceding until the point of testing, that is going to get validated. So with testing, we cannot say that, hey, I'm going to perform testing, at the end of it I'll just give you the results, so deal with it. So that is not the attitude when it comes to testing. So that is why testers have to really work at bringing a lot of enhanced transparency and accountability into the process. So that is why in the test plan document we give a set of rules or assumptions or kind of preconditions that we require in order to be able to test. So assumptions you might think is not so important, but it is extremely important to include the assumptions section in your test plan. So Sohini, if the servers fail, to which team does it fall? It depends. If the servers have failed due to a programmatic error, then that would fall on the developer. But if the servers have failed due to a hardware malfunction, that will fall on the operations team. But if the servers fail because of the connection that did not work, or the database has too much information, it needs to be purged, then that falls on the DBA. So it depends on why things have happened. Not exactly, we cannot exactly say, this means this. So no. So you might ask me, how will I know when I encounter a defect? How will I know who to reach out to? And how do I know which team to direct my problem to? We'll see that in a little bit. So let's take a look at these assumptions. Again, all of these assumptions will not be applicable to all projects. As I said, with this test plan document, I wanted to include every possible situation so that you all will have a reference to tailor this document to your needs. Key assumptions, it says, so key assumptions are like, the overall important ones. It says that production-like data is required and should be available in the system prior to the starting of functional testing. Okay, does that make any sense? Okay, let me explain that. So, some of you are working on the e-commerce, live application. Some of you are working on the cards application. So, in any of these, whether you are searching for a product, or whether you are searching for a car, do you think any results will be retrieved if the database is empty? No. And even if it does, let's say I'm searching for a car. I'm searching for a car that is like, I don't know, with a picture. And let's say this is supposed to behave in XYZ way, okay? The cars without a picture are supposed to behave in WXYZ way. So let's say there is a difference in the behavior. Now, if the database only contains the cars with a picture, no cars with no picture, do you think I'll be able to test that? I'll not be able to test that. Now, in the live application or in the production application, do you think both of these kinds of data will be present, yes or no? So when you're actually, when you send this product out live, so you will be able, there will always be cars with pictures, cars without pictures. Isn't that true? So testing will be really limited when you do not have production like data. So that is why one of the prerequisites that has to happen for all projects is that you must have the data in the backend that is representative of the final production data. Unless that data load into the QA environment happens, testing is never going to be full-fledged. Testing is never going to represent the actual conditions that the software will face once it goes live. So this is one of the assumptions or preconditions that always should, precede the actual testing activity. So that is very, very important. And the next thing it says is, in each testing phase, cycle 3 will be initiated if the defect rate is high in cycle 2. Now, what does this tell us? Any thoughts? So this just means that this project is going with 2 cycles of testing. So we talked about how testing happens at least in 2 cycles, because when we test 100%, there are X number of defects that you would encounter. Now in cycle 2, you would get a new build or a new version of the code that contains the original requirements. In addition to that, it will have the bug fixes for the X defects that were raised in cycle 1. So again, you would test 100% again, and you would probably find Y defects. Now you can stop testing after cycle 2 if X is or irrespective of X, if Y is a comparatively low number. But if you're still getting defects like 3 or 4 defects per day, and all the defects are really impactful, very, very severe, then you probably are not ready to go live even if the cycle 2 runs out. So here we are stating the assumption that if the defect rate is high, we are going to initiate a cycle 3. So we are laying the groundwork on when to stop testing. So all of these guidelines are pointing to the question of when to stop testing. Now this is also an important interview question. You'll be asked, so when do you stop testing? So 2 cycles are done. Does that automatically mean you will stop testing? Or in cycle 1, what if 0 defects were found in cycle 1? Do you just stop testing, or do you still go to cycle 2? What do you think, team? We definitely will not stop this testing. We would always go to cycle 2 because first of all, encountering 0 defects in cycle 1 is not possible at all. Even if you did, you always need that reinforcement. Any additional time that you can get to test your application is always a plus. So if in cycle 1 there are 0 defects, you would still go to cycle 2. See, the reason why I'm saying this is bug-free products never happen. Bug-free products are a myth, as Padma. Yes, that's a good line, and that's true also because when you spend a considerable amount of time with any software, I mean, I have first-hand experience on this with GoTo training software. I've been using it for a year. If I mean, there are things that I haven't, found them as defects in the first few months when I was using it. But right now, if you ask me, there are a million things that are wrong with it. But then again, for the most part, it works. There are few minor here and there, problems that don't work. So it is a decision, it's a judgment call on you whether or not you would sit down and fix those minor problems that probably will not be identified by a regularly using user for about a year, right? So say for example somebody is using GoTo training for just a period of a month or 2, they might be completely satisfied with it because unless you very, very keenly notice it, use it over extended periods of time, use it like few times in a day, then only you'll find those defects. So if you have the luxury of time, I believe that any product will have its defects and we will be able to find it. So in the cycle 1, just because we haven't found any obvious defects, that doesn't mean we stop it. So 2 cycles are always a norm. Whether to go over 2 cycles or not is a decision that is different for different teams. Now, as I said earlier, now the point 1 here in the key assumptions, that is a given for all projects. But point 2 is not a given for all projects because some projects, the norm itself is 3 cycles. So probably in that case, they'll go for a 4th cycle if the defect rate is high. So what if in cycle 3 also the defect is high? Then again, you'll have to bring in everybody's attention, say that, hey, this is the way it is, and all that. But what if we don't find bugs in cycle 2? That's great. You normally just go to productions. Then you don't need the cycle 3. So to answer all these questions, to actually come up with a streamlined process and guidelines on how to behave, you would have, all of these things listed out very, very clearly. Yes, that is true, Tina. So Tina's question is the point 1 also to take into consideration when the site will have cars without picture? Yes, and much more generically, first point will take care that, you will have all the possible forms of data that you can have in the real time in order to test all those scenarios effectively. Okay, moving on. Few things we'll see. I mean, we don't really, we'll go through all of this. This is extremely theoretical. So what we'll do is how to determine what is high. Excellent question, and we'll go over that in a little bit. Next comes the general assumptions, like it says performance exploratory testing will be carried out once the build is ready for testing. The next thing it says is performance testing is not considered for this estimation. And then all defects would have a JPEG snapshot. The team will have test environment via VPN connectivity. So we are talking about the test environment, we are talking about how we are going to report defects, what kind of testing is carried out, what are the team responsibilities. So we are generally laying out the overall assumptions or preconditions that would be required in order for us to go ahead and start testing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not go over each and every one of them, and I'll send you this document out with the email today. You can always read it. If there are any questions, you can always bring them back to the class and we can address it, but most of them are self-explanatory. So functional testing, again, it says that the team will use preloaded data, again the point one of the key assumptions. And then it also says that the testing team will perform only functional testing on Cargoology. So here, yesterday we noted down the requirements, whether or not they were, functional or non-functional in nature. But then here we are limiting our scope to functional testing. Now this is a very specific decision depending on the team, their bandwidth, their technical proficiency, what are they willing to do, what are they not willing to do, and whether or not an independent performance or non-functional team exists. So this does not have to be the case in all projects, in all teams, all scenarios. For example, if you are going to take into consideration the accessibility requirements also, you can mention that you are going to include accessibility and functional testing. So whatever is it that you're going to do on your testing activity, test plan is the place where you mention that. Now UAT test execution will be performed by end users, and QA group will give their support on creating UAT scripts. L1, L2, L3, actually this is something that I've written for one of my projects. L1, L2, L3 are nothing but departments. So this was a product that we were building for these three departments, and we kind of mentioned that all of these end users, and we need them from each of these departments, they should be performing the UAT, and the QA team will support them or give them the UAT scripts or test cases. Next is principles. So this is just again, few guidelines on how we are going to conduct our business. Theory, and also this is optional column or optional section in your test plan. If you would like it, you can have it. Otherwise, you can just remove it. But then I like to keep this because if you remember, we talked about how the testing team is at its maximum strength in terms of manpower when it comes to the test execution phase. So when some new team member is joining in, it is very important to establish that level of induction and tell them, hey, this is how we conduct our business. These are the rules that we follow. These are the principles that guide us and determine what we do and how we do. So in order to have a written reference to these things, I like to put them in the test plan document, but then it's up to you. One thing that I really think is something that we'll all have to keep in mind is that testing activities will be built on previous stages to avoid redundancy and duplication of effort. Now this might not seem like much, but just read it and keep it in mind, because this is something that I feel like this is one of the test principles that we as testers implement the most. So I'll point you to it today itself when we get there. But that's something that I find to be very practical, even though it's a lot of theory here. Then the data approach. Again, it says that the site will come with preloaded data and it is going to be used for testing activities. Now, why are we writing these things like so very many times? If I'm not wrong, this is like the third time we're talking about preloaded test data. The reason why in the test plan it is important to sometimes repeat ourselves. So when it comes to a test plan, the risk of repeatability is very less. So if you repeat something a few times, so what, right? But the risk of somebody missing out on something is high. Now, here's what I'm trying to tell you. Let's say the DBA team is reading this document. Now, do you think they'll read the document from the beginning to the end? No, they're only going to be interested in checking out the data approach. So when they come here, this is all that they're going to read. So this is the expectation that we are going to set for them. So if you expect everyone to read everything and grasp everything, that's not going to happen. That's an unrealistic expectation. So wherever applicable, even though you've written something already, make sure you repeat it. Then comes the scope and levels of testing. So here the scope of testing that we have defined are exploratory, functional, and UAT. Now, if you were performing a smoke testing, if you were performing a sanity testing, if you were doing an accessibility testing, or in the case that performance testing was a part of this project, then you would have to define each form of your testing and set the guidelines for each and every one. Since these are the three things I have chosen, I'm not by any way insinuating that smoke and sanity testing are not included in the test plan, but generally they are included as pre-steps to test planning activities. So there is another place where smoke and sanity testing will be incorporated, not necessarily in the test plan document. So I'll go over each one of that. In the meantime, Tina has a question. Does script here mean test case? Yes. What is the entrance and exit criteria? So entrance criteria is nothing but when to start something. Exit criteria, on the other hand, is when to stop something. So we'll see more on that in the document. But after that, if it doesn't make sense, just let me know. So for the exploratory testing, there is, the purpose of the, every time there is purpose, scope, testers, method, timing. So if you look at it carefully, purpose is why, scope is what, testers is who, method is how, timing is when. You see, it's always the question words. Whenever you see a process, it's always about, demystifying all the questions that you would normally have about the process itself. So there is no need to remember, what test plan should contain or what each level or scope of testing should contain. Just remember to ask the most basic questions about a particular process, and I bet everything will, unravel and be there, right there for us to interpret. So the purpose of testing. So what is the purpose of exploratory testing? It says that this is to remove critical defects before the next levels of testing can start. Does that make sense, team? I mean, we talked about how exploratory testing is to get familiarized and, explore the system. So how do you think it removes the critical defects? Do you think it does or it doesn't? So the reason, or the way in which exploratory testing removes critical defects is, maybe critical is not the right word there. The right word probably should be obvious defects. See, when I am trying to, find my way through something, I'll not follow a certain, a certain sequence of steps to actually, find the problem, or will I follow a certain planned strategy, like I'll not go through like menu option 1, menu 2 through, so I probably will not follow a sequential order as well. So in that case, when I'm randomly clicking here and there, when something is really obvious, I'm going to be able to identify that. So the purpose of exploratory testing is to do just that. So will smoke and sanity testing be done before the test plan document is written? No. So I think another point of reference back to where we are at is important at this point of time. So you have the test planning activity, which is where we are right now, and test design, and finally test execution. So test execution is smoke, sanity, exploratory testing, ad hoc or monkey testing, other names for the same, then the functional testing followed by the UAT. So this is the actual testing. So this happens on the AUT. Test planning, no AUT, right? But then smoke and sanity testing are not officially incorporated into the test plan document because smoke and sanity testing are not actually testing. So I recently heard the term discovery testing used for smoke plus sanity testing. Now this might not be a common term that is used everywhere. One of my clients was using the term discovery testing to imply that it is smoke plus sanity testing. But yeah, this is where we are at, and smoke and sanity testing are generally not part of the test plan because there's not a lot to plan there. It's just a form of testing that is performed to see if we are ready or not. But then there is also another area where we will discuss smoke and sanity testing, not in the test plan officially. So the scope of this, what parts of the application are we going to explore? The first level navigation, dealer, and admin. So all of the constituent elements of the AUT. Who is going to perform this? The testing team. What is the method? This is carried out without any application, test scripts and documentation. And when does this happen? At the beginning of each cycle. Now, exploratory testing happens at the beginning of each cycle, remember, not exactly at the beginning of the testing itself. So whenever a new piece of code is installed into the QA environment and you will have to test it, one of the first things that happens is the exploratory testing, where you're trying to figure out, what's happening, where you are at, if there are any obvious errors. Next comes functional testing. So this is going to be very interesting for us. The reason why this is carried out is to check the functions of the application. So this is carried out by feeding the input and validating the output from the application. So here you're actually validating. You are really dealing with the application itself, providing it an input, getting its output, checking whether or not that output meets your expectations. So that is functional test. Now it comes to the scope. So there were a few questions about whether scope is test scenarios or is this different, what is that? So we'll try to look at what scope is and what does it contain. So here what I've done is I've embedded an Excel sheet. Now this is a practice that I've been following for the last couple of years because I don't like to write test plan documents over and over again. So as you've seen, we are only through 8 pages of it and we have spent about, close to 45 minutes discussing this document. So it is intricate, it is important to get it right, and it's not something that you want to repeat yourself over a period of time, wasting a lot of time, and at a given time when you keep writing this over and over again, it might, seem extremely tedious and boring, honestly. So that's why what I like to do is I like to keep this test plan document as a shell, and I can actually use this for any application. All I have to do is change few names and change the assumptions based on the project, and then I can just embed these documents, just make changes to these documents and incorporate that into my main test plan. That way I keep this readable, I keep this short, I keep this document reusable. So this is a general best practice I recommend, but then this is not the only way you can do it. If you feel comfortable writing your scope right here in your functional test section, you can do that. You don't have to embed a document in here. So if you see here, this is the scope. Now what I'm listing out here is who are the actors, what are the scenarios that they are performing, what are the sub-levels, or and what is the complexity of each of this feature, how many negative scenarios can I get, if there is any additional. So here I'm adding like buffer of 1 or 2 that I might get, because I might not be very accurate in planning. So I'll just put some additional test cases that I'll come up with. Now if you look here, is this similar to your test scenarios? Yes or no? It's not the same, but it is, slightly similar in terms that we are listing out the feature, we are assigning an importance, we are estimating the number of test cases. But the reason why we don't include TS_01 and all that, and we don't write like validate and all that, is because this document is not just consumed by testers. So for developer or for a business analyst, it will not make sense to include all those, names and complicated codes on IDs and all that. But however, if you are pressed for time, if you don't have time to write a generic document like this, and if all you have is a test scenario document, I would say don't reinvent the wheel. Use that in your scope document, because it is not that big a deal when you look at it. All they have to do is just ignore the ID column and they can just work with the rest of it, right? So there are 2 ways to do that. One is you can just list out the features and give an approximate number. But if you do have expecting additional test cases, is because we are leaving a little bit of elasticity. What I mean is, say if you've estimated that there are 10 negative test cases, 5 positive test cases and all that, so you are leaving 1 or 2 test cases, you're overestimating just so you have that, cushion just in case you don't have enough time. So you just, as I said yesterday, overestimate but not underestimate. So this is where we are segregating the overestimating part. And you don't have to have these exact columns. If you don't feel like this makes sense, take it off. So again, you know what? These are documents that I have created based on my clients' needs. So my clients were expecting that, they needed to have an additional expecting additional test cases and all that. So I kind of included that. But that's the header itself is not standard. You can do it in any way you like. Make sense, team? So here we are basically listing out all the features we are testing. We are also, assigning them a priority. So yesterday there was a question about what if the BA, thinks that a priority or a complexity or importance of a certain test scenario is high or low. Now this is a way where this is an area where they can go ahead and take a look at it, and if they have an objection, they can let us know and we can discuss and come to a common consensus. And who does this? The testing team. The method. You will have the functional test scripts which are stored in HP ALM. Now HP ALM is HP Quality Center, which is a test management software. Now this test plan is written with the assumption that a test management software is used to manage your test cases. But that is not always the case. You don't always need a test management software. But the reason why I incorporated that into this particular test plan is a lot of my students had trouble in adapting the test plan from a manual environment to an automation or managed environment with the software. So I thought, let me create the difficult one. So adapting it backward or re-engineering it backward might be an easier option. So test management software is something that maintains your test cases, it maintains your defects. So it's like a centralized repository that enhances the experience of testing. So we will discuss test management software and everything at the in week 4. So let's not go over there. But yeah. So when does this happen? It happens after the exploratory testing is completed. And the test acceptance criteria. So acceptance criteria in the sense, when do we say that we will start testing? So it says the acceptance criteria or entry criteria in this case should be that the FRD should be approved, use case documents must be available. This should happen before the test design phase starts, because unless you have an FRD document or any of the reference documents finalized, we cannot really start writing our test documentation, like test scenarios or test cases based on them. And then the test cases are approved and signed off prior to test execution. The development is completed, unit testing has passed, and the results are shared to the testing team. Now, this is specific to one of my projects, but it does not have to be the norm in all cases. So unit testing teams, we cannot ask the unit team, are you all able to hear me okay? Right, so let's just give it a minute, maybe it'll get better. So the development team, will perform their unit testing and integration testing. Now, in some companies, it is a process that they have to share their results with us, but in some companies, it's not. So if it is, include this step, otherwise take it out. So while you're using this shell and customizing it to your need, you will have to be careful and make sure that it is accurate. And then the testing environment with application is installed, configured, and ready to use. So once these criteria is satisfied, we can say that we can get ready. So here we have broken them down into the tabular format, the exact same content, so that it makes a better impact. So sign off has to be done on the FRD, use cases and test cases. The readiness in the sense the development should be completed, application should be deployed, data should be available, defect fixes should be planned based on defect triage and evaluation criteria. Now defect triage is nothing but a defect meeting where everybody sits down, takes a look at all the defects that are encountered so far and decide on when to test, when to fix them, in what order to fix them, whether to fix them or not. We'll talk a little bit more on that when we move to the defects part of it. But these are the things that have to be ready, and these are the sign-offs that have to be done for us to accept the test criteria. So I missed Patricia's question. Sorry about that. Can we use this testing in reporting, meaning business intelligence? I would say why not? Because in my opinion, every testing is a three-point agenda. So irrespective of whether it's a healthcare application, intelligence application, whether it has a front end or not, it doesn't matter. Sure, you can. Of course, there are going to be different technicalities, but the overall, sequence of steps and overall strategy would remain pretty much similar. I wouldn't say same, but similar. Then the deliverables. So we are talking about what kind of output do we generate, who is the author, who is going to review it. So first and foremost is a test plan, then test cases, defects, we send out daily status reports and a test closure reports and the end of the testing activity. So here we are listing out what outputs are going to come up, who is going to author them and who is going to review them. And in some cases we also mention the date on which you can expect this outcome to, the deliverable to be ready. Then the milestones. Again, for milestones, I keep it in an Excel sheet to keep it readable, to keep it, to make sure that I can reuse this document over and over again. So milestones, let's take a look at that. We'll come back to the rest of the stuff in a bit. So milestones, pardon the older dates, but just to give you an idea on what this has. So milestones are that nothing but the significant dates on which something starts, something ends, and all of that. So you see cycle 1 and cycle 2 are, planned here. The exact dates are mentioned. When is the development day going to happen? When is the retesting going to happen? Cycle 2, when is it going to begin? When is the development going to happen, and then when is the retest day going to happen. So the exact dates and timelines are listed here. So you can list out, the exact timelines for your project in the milestones section. Now, before we move away from the milestone, this section needs a little bit of consideration. It says that any issues in the system environment readiness, if scope changes, if any other dependency comes up, then this is going to impact the effort and timelines. So what we are communicating ahead of time is that even though we are setting up certain timelines and certain dates to do a certain task, this might change because of the following reasons. Then there is user UAT. So UAT, what is the purpose? This is for validating the business logic. So this allows the end users to complete one final review prior to the deployment. Who is going to participate? End users from L1, L2, and L3. Now, why are we planning? I mean, this is also something that I asked in the beginning of the session. Why are we planning UAT? Now, the reason why we plan UAT is because of two reasons. One is the users are not testers, so they cannot plan for it themselves. So they cannot strategize. They cannot, they don't know how to be ready for testing. Of course, you cannot expect them to be because they are not testers. They are not, formal QA testers. So first is they lack the expertise to be able to do that. Second is QA team will always have a part to play in the UA team, which means we will have to plan for the activity that we are going to do. So either ways, whether the UAT team is equipped enough to be able to plan their activity by themselves, we still should be able to, still have to plan it. So that is why UAT planning is an integral part of your test planning activity. And the method will be that, you'll provide the test cases and they'll run it and then they'll interpret the results. And this is going to be done after the exploratory and functional testing is done. And only after this test is completed, the product can be released to production. Then there are deliverables like, UAT test cases, who is going to create them and who is going to review them. And then comes the effort estimation. Sorry, team. So effort estimation lists out every single activity that will happen in the QA phase, and assigns a certain number of man hours. So here you see we are not planning in days, we are planning in man hours. So you see the first activity that we are writing here is that the existing application familiarization orientation KT for the team is 10 man hours. Now I'm sure if you're new to IT or if you're new to QA, you must always be wondering how will my day one be? Will I be able to catch up? Will I be able to, work and deliver whatever, output is expected from me? Now, most applications or most companies, most projects, most teams, see for QA or for IT teams in general, we don't work on the same thing for the entirety of our career. So every time there is a new product, new version, so we are all starting fresh, whether or not you are, you've already been in IT or you've already been in QA or not. So knowledge transfer, KT starts for knowledge transfer, is an integral part of every project. So official time is allocated for knowledge transfer for every team, irrespective of whether you're new or whether you come with a previous experience. Following the knowledge transfer familiarization, there's requirement analysis, test planning, environment setup, ad hoc or exploratory testing, test case development. So these are all the activities that are performed by the team, may or may not include the team lead, but the team lead independently has 10% of the entire effort allocated just for coordination, leading, and status reporting activities. Then the execution. So each cycle is planned out. And if the UAT for contingency. So contingency is a 25% factor in some companies. For some companies, it is a 30% factor. Now, yesterday somebody was asking me, how can I tell that, this much amount of time it will take for me to test, or how many steps can I come up with, and all that. Now, the industry standard is, again, this is subject to change. Yesterday we wrote 2 test cases. If we are writing test cases of that nature, the standard is that one person can write 30 test cases per day. So this is, again, depending on, again, complexity of the application, number of test steps in there and all that. So when you can write and execute 30 test cases per day, let's say if there are 90 test cases, one team member. So you'll estimate 3 days, correct? For the entire 3 days for writing, documentation, 3 days for execution. Now, when we plan this way, this is always very, very aggressive, I would say. Now, why is it aggressive? You might ask me, because we are planning exactly based on how much we can write. But there is always contingencies. There's always unexpected, issues or unexpected situations that come up because of which we might not be able to stick to the plan. So that is why the industry standard is to calculate 30% in addition to what we need. So if you need 3 days for testing, 3 days for writing, so you plan around 4 days for writing, 4 days for execution. So that is what this contingency is talking about. So here in this particular company, it was 25%. So this is again subject to change. 30% I normally do. Depending on the client, sometimes it might be 25. Sometimes we might have to provide post-production. Sometimes we have to train the support team on how to use the system. So if any of these additional activities are present, we can list them out. Now, what I really like about this sheet is not necessarily how many hours each one is taking, but the list of all the activities that normally go in. So this is an excellent way to see what all things that testing team might be involved in, and this also gives us a broader perspective of how testing team is not just something that comes at the end, pushes some buttons, and pronounces whether or not the software is fit to use. Okay, so that's the effort estimate. Any questions? Are you all with me? Okay. Now comes the execution strategy. So here we are talking about, how will we run our test cases? When do we start it? When do we stop it? All of that. So entry and exit criteria. So entry criteria refers to desirable conditions in order to start the test execution. So the exit criteria is the desirable conditions that need to be met in order to proceed with the implementation. So implementation in the sense the product going live. So entry criteria are flexible benchmarks. If they are not met, the test team will assess the risk, identify mitigation actions, and provide a recommendation. So you see, even though we have a set entry and exit criteria, there is no telling that they will always be 100% satisfied. If they are not, everybody sits down, analyzes the risk and all of that. Now, entry criteria we also discussed briefly as acceptance criteria while we are talking about functional testing. But let's talk about exit criteria. Now, this is not the same for all projects. That is something that we have to keep in mind. This is not a generic list. But this is an exhaustive list of most of the things, but all of these statistics like 90% pass rate, this is subject to change. You'll have to check with your management team, with your company, with your project leads and all to come up with the exact rate that you are looking for. So the exit criteria says the 100% test scripts have to be executed. So at the end of the cycle 2, you'll sit down and evaluate this exit criteria checklist. So if the 100% of test cases are executed, you'll just say check. If 90% of the test cases have passed, check. If there are non-critical and high severity defects are not open, that means all of them are fixed, you'll say check. So when all of these exit criteria are satisfied, that's when you will stop testing and not move to cycle 2. So this is, as I said, different for different teams. So how will we come up with the test, with a list of exit criteria? One is the QA lead will do this based on their previous experiences. And the other is you will have to talk to your management team and the client and see how far are they willing to go. What is it that they're looking for? What kind of expectations do they have? And then you will have to write it. The exit criteria must be approved or reviewed by the test lead. In fact, the exit criteria checking is an activity that is driven by the test lead. So the test lead will actually, assign somebody or work with somebody on determining whether or not everything is, satisfied or not. But if in case that's not happening, then sure, yes, test lead must approve and review it. And then about the test cycles. So this is saying that there are 2 levels of functional cycle, 2 cycles. So same thing again we are repeating. UAT will just be 1 cycle. UAT is always, again, most of the time 1 cycle only. There will not be a repetition ever. Then validation and defect management. So all of these steps again probably will not make sense to us now because these are talking about defect management using ALM. But I would recommend revisiting the test plan document once after we are done with week 4. So all of this will make more sense. So please do that, team, or if you want me to do that in the class, just let me know and we can do that. Moving on, Emilio's question was, how do I know that there is a high rate of testing, high rate of defects? Define high, correct? So one way to define high is setting these numbers. No critical or high severity defects exist. Sometimes the clients will give you a number, less than 3. Or less than 2, something like that. So when you know it is less than 3, that according to the client means a low rate, and that's what you're looking for. On the other hand, how can you determine that defects are critical or high severity? This is the table that will help us do this. So yesterday, if you remember, or day before, when we're talking about the importance field in the test scenarios, if you just leave it up to people, they're going to assign anything that they see fit. I mean, it's not really their fault because you never set the guidelines on how to conduct your business, on how to set the severity, importance. Similarly for defects, when you encounter, let's say there is a problem in your application, you will have to take a look at this table, read all the parameters and set the appropriate severity parameter. So this is a table not to worry at this point of time. When we will discuss defects in the class, we will revisit this table and use it as a guideline to set our severity. But to give you an example, a bug is supposed to be critical if it crashes the system, causes the file corruption, or causes potential data loss. Or if it is considered critical if there's an abnormal return to the operating system, that means there's a failure. On the other hand, it is considered cosmetic if there is an insufficient and unclear error message that has no impact on the product use. So when you encounter a bug, just look at what kind of impact it is causing and set the appropriate severity. Then the test metrics. Metrics also we'll discuss when we are going to the test execution phase. But to give you an overall idea of what metrics is, we'll just talk a little bit about it. Test metrics are nothing but intelligent numbers. Now, what I'm trying to tell you here is, let's say I'm reporting my testing status to the client. Okay, on a particular day, I have executed 30 test cases. So I will say at the end of the day, 30 test cases executed. So on day 2, I will say 45 test cases are executed overall. So that means I've executed 15 test cases today. Day 3, I will again give a random number, 90 test cases. Now when I do this, am I giving an indication of whether am I on time or not? Or am I giving an indication of is the product or AUT quality good or bad? Yes or no, team? No, I'm randomly giving some numbers. I'm giving raw data, raw information. Now this raw information is not very useful unless you refine it and you actually come up with some intelligent number, some sort of an inference from these numbers. So in addition, as opposed to just giving these plain numbers, if I said on day 2 that 50% of my test cases are done and 90% of my test cases have passed. So that means if I ran 100 tests, 90 of them have passed. So 90 of them are 90% of my tests did not result any defects. Do you think that's good news? I would say so, because if 90% is passing, the application for the most part is working. And on day 2, if I'm done with 50% of my test cases, do you think that's good news? I mean, I will, if everything goes fine, I should be done testing in just 2 days. So this kind of statistics, this kind of numbers, when you refine your raw data and come up with meaningful numbers, that becomes your test metrics. Now test metrics, there are a million metrics that you can collect. You can collect execution strategy, you can collect defect density, there's mean time to failure. I mean, I'm just throwing out names at you to just give you an idea of how complex these test metrics can be and what wide range of variety there is available. So that is why as a QA team, it is very important to decide which ones you are going to pick up. So in your test plan, you'll make a decision on what kind of metrics you're going to collect and at what intervals. So test preparation and execution report is going to contain the percentage complete, percentage work in progress. So we'll discuss what each one of these is and how do we calculate it going further. But these are the metrics that are going to be collected on a weekly or daily basis. When it comes to the test execution status report, we are going to report pass, fail, total defects, highlight the showstoppers and critical defects, and we're going to do this daily. And in the weekly project status report, we are going to this is something that is driven by the project manager, and we'll send this weekly only to the project team and everyone. So we are actually deciding what kind of reports are we generating, why are we generating, what kind of metrics are we including, and at what frequency. This also does not have to be same for all projects. This table is also not generic across all projects. Different teams make different decisions on what they want to look at on a daily or weekly or monthly or whatever basis that they want. Coming to the defect tracking and reporting. So following your question on if there is a system failure, so if there's a server failure, who do I let them know? How do I know which team it needs to go? So that process is also outlined in your test plan document. So anytime a defect is encountered, this is the sequence of steps that need to be followed. Let me just zoom it a little bit so maybe you'll see better. Yeah. So once the defect is encountered, we assign it to the test lead. So the test lead will validate the defects. Now, see, team members, all of them will work on their individual modules, but that doesn't mean that team member A and team member B, they will not find the same defects. They might find something on home page which is probably common territory, right? So in that case, do we raise 2 defects for just one problem? No, right? There has to be some sort of moderator, mediator who will overlook the defects that are being generated and report them appropriately. So that role is played by the test lead, and all the defects that are encountered, they are sent to the test lead to validate. And the test lead will then assign it to the development lead. So assigning is nothing but send it. Let them know that this has happened and tell them that, hey, this is something that needs your attention, so please look into it. That is simply the meaning of assignment. So once the development lead receives the defects, they are going to do some initial analysis, and depending on that they will assign it to the developer or the environment team, anybody who is supposed to fix it. So the developer then will fix the defects and send it back to the tester, who will retest the defects. And if they find that the defect has been removed, in other words, if they approve it, then they'll close the defect and the process stops. But if it's not approved, the defect goes back to the development lead for initial analysis, and then it retracts this. Now, more or less, this is the generic process that is followed in all projects, except that sometimes testers directly assign all the defects to development lead, or the testers will directly assign it to test lead, and the test lead will then assign it to the individual developer in case there's just one developer. In that case, there will not be a dev lead. So as I said, more or less this is generic, but you will probably have to do a little bit of customizing based on how your project works. Okay, so that is the defect tracking and reporting process. And then the test management process is how you will use the tool. Again, if you want to take a look at, Quality Center. So when we finished working on Quality Center, and if you want to come back and take a look at this, that time it will make more sense. So I'll recommend definitely to go back to your test plan document once we are done with that. And that brings us to the last section of the test plan document, which is the risk document, section. Now, risk is very important to assess in every project. Now, let's talk about the risk management process from the beginning. Now, risks are any potential problem. So when we talk about potential problem, it means that the problem hasn't happened, but there is a chance that that problem might happen. So the common problems that QA teams will face is the schedule not being sufficient, right? For some reason, there are too many defects in the application, or the team size, or not enough team members, something like that. So there are like problems relating to people, relating to defects, relating to schedule, relating to technologies that we are using, tools that we are using. Or there might be like unanticipated delays because of an earthquake or tornado. I mean, of course the chances are slim, and we always would want something like that to not happen, but there's no telling that it will not. So all of these are potential problems. They might not have happened right now, but there's a good chance, or at least a slim chance, of these things happening. So the very first step to risk management process is to identify the risk. So risk identification is nothing but a simple listing of all of these risks. So the first step to risk management process is where you will list out all the risks that you have. So to give you an idea, there's a schedule list. So it says the schedule is tight, and if we start and for some reason if we get delayed, the UAT will not and cannot be extended beyond the scheduled start date. And then not having enough resources, defects, critical defects being found late in the cycle, scope getting redefined, natural disasters, non-availability of the environment, new issues. All of these are some of the defects that you can encounter. So that is the first step, risk identification. The next step to risk management process is risk impact analysis. So impact, as we probably talked about earlier in the class, just means that how much of a detrimental effect that this potential problem, which when it materializes, will cause on the system that we have. So this is your QA project. So always remember that the risk at this point of time is at the level of a project, not for the application under test. So here we are not considering what can go wrong with the product itself. We are always thinking about what can go wrong with the project as an entire testing project. Okay, so that is why this is a part of the test plan, not part of the test strategy per se. Yeah, the next thing is impact analysis. So impact analysis is nothing but a way to prioritize the defects. Now, prioritize the risks. Which one? So there are two factors here. One is the probability of occurrence and the impact. So let's take a look at two things. One is schedules. So the development team getting delayed for some reason, the environment not being available, or simply the BA not being available to review the test cases. Any of these things or some other things might cause the QA cycle to start later than intended. So this is a schedule related risk. And then there is other risk of natural disaster. Let's say, a tornado hitting you or something like that. Now, which one do you think probably will happen more, one or two? Yeah, so the schedule not being met is, you have a higher chance of that happening. So that is why probability and impact are assigned values like high, medium, and low. Again, this is a guideline that have to be set beforehand. And probability values. So the schedule going wrong, there is a high probability of that. The impact is also high because when you lose precious testing time, the already little testing time that we have, the impact is huge. Then resources. So there are not enough resources, again, you would plan accurately or, you would maximum utilize the resources that you already have. So that's a medium risk. But then if that does happen, if you don't have enough people to test, that will have a detrimental impact. Similarly, all the defects are assigned probability and impact. Now, who is going to assign the probability of an impact? If you ask me that question, it's a collective decision. So the QA team members, the QA team lead, the business analyst, the project manager, all of them sit together, they prepare this risk management section. So once the probability and impact are assigned, the list is organized in a way that the highest risk items are always on your top, and it moves on to low risk and low priority things. So we talked about two steps. One is sorry about that. One is the identification of the risk itself. Next is impact analysis. Third one is mitigation. Mitigation is nothing but, again, literal meaning what mitigation means is to lessen or to, to bring down the impact. So how are you going to handle that? How are you going to minimize the impact of a certain risk, which when it materializes? So mitigation plan also is not generic to all companies. Different teams react differently to different problems. So whatever solution that your team has come up with, you'll just go ahead and list it here. So for the schedule related risk, it is listed that the testing team can control the preparation tasks ahead, and then some buffer is added to the schedule for contingencies. So these are two ways in which the risk of schedule requirements not being met is mitigated or lessened. So this is a precautionary step that we are taking as a QA team to make sure that the risk is handled in a better way. And then the resources. So holidays and vacations have been estimated and built into the schedule. Deviations from the estimation could derive in delays in the testing. So sometimes, when we are testing, we kind of, or when we are estimating, we kind of overlook that there are holidays in this holidays coming up, or we overlook that somebody has a personal time off. So that will cause to all of these resources not being there, or time not being sufficient, effort estimation going wrong, and all of those things. So by making sure that we estimate accurately, we can actually handle the problem of not having enough resources. So on and so forth. So this table will give you a good mix of how things are going to be handled. So in case of natural disasters, this team has decided that there are different teams that are separated geographically, so that not everybody goes into a natural calamity at the same time, and when one team is unavailable, the other can pick it up. So different teams, different companies handle these things differently. So, but this is the risk section of the test plan, and always remember that risk section of the test plan is referring to not the application under test and what can go wrong with the application. We are not concerned about that. We are only concerned about what can go wrong with a QA team or a QA project as a whole. Makes sense, team? Are you all with me? Any questions on risk management? Okay, so which brings us to the last thing, which is the communication plan and the team roster. So here you would like write all your names and contact numbers. So this is also the way to make sure that the communication channels are open, and if you need to reach out to someone, you can just open your test plan, find your contact information, find their contact information, and reach out to them. And the detailed roles and responsibilities are also listed. What is expected from each one of your team member in detail. So this is generic information, can be very useful. So I highly recommend going ahead and reading it. But in the interest of time, let's not do that. But please take some time over the weekend to go over the content in the test plan, because this is really very insightful, team. We have put in a lot of effort to make this test plan the way it is today. So anything that came to our mind, anything that we thought was remotely useful to the testing activity, we've made it a point to put it in words and incorporate it into this test plan. So please give it a reading. I'm sure this is going to be useful, and let me know if you have any questions. So finally, the environment information is also listed out here. So that is the end of a test plan. And I know that's a lot of theory, but as I said earlier, the good news is that you don't have to rewrite this document over and over again. You just have to make few changes. You just have to make sure that you include the scope, milestone, and effort documents independently, and keep all this generic text as is when applicable. So that way you are not looking at rewriting a 20-page document every time you start over. And you can actually maintain a standard for all of your test plans going forward. So that's it. And yeah, if there's any questions, I'm ready to take them right now. So there were a few things that I said I'll answer later. So did I get to them yet? I know that there's still localization and globalization testing. I'm yet to take that. But other than that, if there's any other question that I haven't got to, just let me know. So in the meantime, let me discuss a few things about our assignment. There's nothing much to add to what we did yesterday, but there are a few things that I want to discuss. One is the was this not it? No, sorry, team. So when we wrote these test cases yesterday, I see that some of you have assigned a positive or negative per step. Now, positive or negative is not a value that you assign corresponding to a step. This is also for the entire test case. So either a test case is positive or negative. So it will not have some positive steps and some negative steps. So that's something that you'll have to keep in mind. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is a spell check, team. Again, very important. Please do a spell check. Make sure that you are creating as bug-free a product in the form of your test case as you can. The next thing that I wanted to discuss is, there was one test case where one of the steps was make payment. The last step was make payment, and then the expected result was that the payment is made. Now, steps like this are not, I wouldn't say incorrect, but uh, are not very productive as you would expect them to be, because when you say make payment, it's not like in store that you just give a credit card and it's done. When you're making payment through any online application, you'll have to remember that there are steps to it. You'll have to select your mode of payment. You'll have to enter your credit card information or your PayPal information, any other information. You will have to choose, like, do you need a receipt or not, all of that, and then click on making a payment. So always make sure that the constituent steps of your test case are just one step at a time. So do not include complex test steps. So that is something that will not work. And the other thing that I wanted to so one of the testing principles, as I showed you, is to reduce the redundancy. Now, when you look at this test case here, we are pretty much repeating all of the test steps. So one way we can reduce the redundancy in here is to take out all of these steps. So for example, here's what I can do. I can write my precondition as So when I do this, what I'm pretty much doing is I'm eliminating myself. I'm eliminating a need to write all of these steps over and over again. So use the precondition to your advantage to make sure that you're not repeating again, and to set actually the exact state of the application where you want to begin your test case. So this is in one way you can reduce the number of test steps, reduce the amount of rewriting that you can do. And when it comes to expected result, one of the questions that I got was, do I have to write the expected result? Like for example, here in the test case 2, there's an expected result for few of the steps. For few of them, it's not there. So do I have to write these intermediary steps? Can I not write like one result at the end of it saying that the admin should be able to enter successfully when they give an invalid whatever? Now that is okay. If you want to have like one expected result for the entire test case, that's fine. But I would not recommend it, because when you are sequence wise testing it, what if an intermediary step fails? What if the admin login page is not getting displayed? In that case, I would not have a proper recording mechanism to exactly give me the insight on where things did not work. So that's why, at least while you're practicing, make sure that there is an expected result for make sure that there's an expected result for every test case that you're writing, test step that you're writing, wherever applicable again. So when you're entering the admin username, there's really, you probably will not be able to, nothing will change on the application. There's no discernible result that you're seeing there. So in those cases, you do have an option to not go there, but when applicable, make sure that you're writing the expected results stepwise. And today, I would say over the weekend, write as many test cases as you like, and play around with how much how well you can use the precondition column in order to get to the state that you want the application to be in. So that's something that I want you all to think about over the weekend. And so the assignment for this weekend is to actually work as much on test cases, write as many as you can and send it to me, and also to give test plan document a good reading and bring in any questions that you might have. So as I said earlier, I do have a list of questions. So let me just take them. I know, I wish I could have answered them in an email, but I felt like, it's hard to communicate elaborate thought over an email, because when you write what you're thinking, it just kind of, sometimes there is a disconnect. So I'll just answer your questions in the session today. So the very first question is about, how do we gain the domain knowledge? So that's a very important question and interesting question also. Now, this is like, a common concern among everybody who's trying to get into IT. And every time, we have these domain sessions, you will be surprised at the amount of turnout that we have. Like, people are like crazy about domain. But the best way to learn any domain, in my experience, would be to learn on job. So see, there are some things you can learn before you get into the job, but there are a lot of things that you will learn on job through experience. So domain knowledge is best learned while you are actually working on something. And even if you sit down to learn any domain, there are, I don't know, I don't even know how many domains there are. So there are like like this entertainment, this oil and gas, there's clothing, there's retail, there is e-commerce, there's banking, there's finance, there's mortgages, there's loans, there's like healthcare. So there's like a lot of domains. But then if you have your eye on a particular domain, and if you aspire to be a business analyst, then I would recommend taking a course on the domain knowledge. But otherwise, if you are aiming to be a QA and be able to test your application successfully, in that case, I would say be open. And also, team, this is one of the concerns that I hear from participants who are done with the class, because a lot of times, especially this is true of people from UK, I don't know what is it with UK, but everyone wants to do a banking project and they only want to get into a banking application. So don't have certain such limitations. Don't set yourself up and say that I'm only going to work in a banking project. No, there's a lot of diversity available, and this is the blessing that QA teams have because we are not confined to any domains, which makes us great. So for testing applications, domain knowledge, not having domain knowledge is definitely not an inhibition, because as long as you understand the requirement, you understand what inputs need to go, you understand what to test and how to test, you're good to go. So don't limit yourself to domain knowledge. Be open for experimenting. There are lots of domains out there. It's practically impossible to learn all of them. But if you do have your eye on one, if you do want to go into business analysis, and if you do want to become a subject matter expert, then I would say you might want to do that. The next question is, for other types of non-functional testing, such as load performance, can we use the same SDLC? Yes. So if you are planning, I mean, it would take a slightly different stage. Say, for example, if you are planning like a usability testing. So does it still apply that we do test planning, test designing, and test execution? Absolutely, yes. So you would plan the testing. How long would you take? What strategy are you going to follow? You design your tests. That is, what kind of transactions are you going to give to your users? What kind of data are you going to use? And then you'll perform the steps. So for functional or non-functional testing, the 3 steps of SDLC are the same. Then coming to next, for all testing projects, SDLC method or process can be applied. However, every project is different in terms of application specifics. So is there a standard software tool specific for testing projects available to implement this SDLC? Yes. So that is a good question. The tool that is available, the tools or the genre of tools that are available in order to help us perform the SDLC, is called the test management software, or these days they're actually called application lifecycle management softwares. So to give you examples, there's all kinds of them. So there's HP ALM, which is HP's application lifecycle management tool, which used to be HP Quality Center earlier. And then there is tools like Rally, Jira, and all of these which help us with the test management process. So yes, there are tools, but again, see, tools are there to make our life easy. So we should not go into the assumption that if the tools are not there, we will not be able to work. So tools are there to make things easy. If you are looking for a tool to enhance the process, then they are present. But when they are not there, so if you are not using a QC or any other tool, it doesn't mean we cannot test at all or that we cannot implement SDLC. So the reverse is not true. We are covering in the course, or does it take into consideration? No, we are not considering any of the CMMI or capability maturity models or ISO standards or the Six Sigma standards. No, we are working with a strategy that works most. And when I say that, that doesn't mean that the strategy that is working most for us will not comply to these standards. It might, it may not, but for us, our aim is to get the job done. I know I'm not reading the questions in detail, but I'm hoping you'll just catch up reading this on my screen. And the next thing is, I'm very interested in having your insights about how to help clients perceive the importance of a testing project. That's a good question. First thing is, in these days, there is no need to do that, first of all, because testing has been agreed that it's an integral part of the testing, it's an integral part of the software development process. So that level of buy-in is already there in the market. But if you want to convince the client that a certain a different strategy or the use of a tool or use of a different method might benefit, the best way to do that is through proof of concept. Proof of concept means you would, if you have like a 100 requirement application that you want to test. So far you've been using XYZ method, but you want to tell your client that this is not the right one. Even if you invest like a certain amount of X amount of money, in the long run, ABC is what will fetch you maximum ROI. So if this is what you're trying to show, if there is amount A that you're investing, so right now the need for this kind of thing that you'll have to show will come up if X is greater than A. If the input money that the client is putting in for an alternative method, if that is greater, then you will have to go in for the ROI calculation. So the best way to do that is through proof of concept. What proof of concept means is you'll take a limited part of this application, like 10 requirements or something. Then you will implement the ABC method, make the calculations and show them the results actually. I know it takes time, I know it takes a lot of effort, and probably with our busy schedules we don't get enough time, but the best way to sell your strategy or the best way to market a new way is only through proof of concept, because nobody is going to believe a theoretical concept. ROI means return on investment, so we talked about that yesterday. So proof of concept is something, but proof of concept just means that a practical implementation and practical results. We're focusing on and we're covering the SDLC process. It is right to use the same for non-functional testing? Yes. So yes, we can use that. As I can see, the process are still requirements. Yes, that is a good observation. Yes, the question is that if FRD is the heart of the process, but I assume there is a special need to do non-functional testing, there must be something similar to the FRD document, like performance requirement document or a load requirement. So for the first part of your question, yes, you will have to, the SDLC process is applicable for non-functional testing as well. And you are right. If there is like a performance requirements that the software is supposed to satisfy, or if there is a stress testing, or if there's security requirements that the application is supposed to satisfy, there will be a performance or stress testing requirements document. So yes, you will have that. So no, for non-functional testing, the process is not totally different. It is the same approach. So in the special case of regression testing, so regression testing is not non-functional testing. It is functional testing. It has to use the test cases that we already used. Yes. So if I understand this question correctly, your question is that for regression testing, you would use the set of test cases that I already created. So if your question is for a future version, what happens if these test cases need to be changed, correct? So in that case, you would do something called a test case maintenance, which means you will update your test cases based on the requirements of the future version. So in no way you will start writing one more time, but you'll just update them. This method is called change management, and we will discuss change management next week. So that's definitely in the agenda, and all of these are very good observations and very, very insightful questions. So thank you for sending me those. And I'm glad I didn't answer them through email, because I hope the class has also benefited from, this is a good way to start a brainstorming activity. This is just definitely food for thought. So yeah, keep them coming, anything that you have in your mind, and we will definitely answer them. Deepti's question is, where should we write actual results in the test case? Not yet, Deepti. So just stick to the format that we have right now. So does limited domain knowledge limit your job opportunities? I mean, my personal experience tells me that it doesn't, but then it is again, it also depends on what your personal aspirations are. So if you want to just be in the banking domain, then it is not necessarily the domain that is limiting you, but you are the one who's limiting the domain for yourself. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how I see it. Can you tell me on the extra column we need? No, there is no extra column necessary. All I'm saying is try to optimize the precondition column. Just write the positive or negative once per the test case, and then you can write the expected result for every step wherever applicable, not necessarily for the entire test case. Okay. That's all there was. And one final thing, localization and globalization testing. That's a good question. And there are lots of web pages where the content is the same, but then it's going to be displayed in different languages and time zones. And sometimes for few countries, the content orientation is also different. So for some countries, we like left to right, in others they write right to left. So there is always all of these different things. But sites normally don't maintain, like, let's say there is, I don't know, google.com or something like that. Now, do you think google.com will create different pages for each of these different countries, each of these different languages? No. The content that you have will simply get translated. So globalization, localization is pretty much the same, whichever context you're looking at. So in this form of testing, we will test the translation part, and we will test the same page in different languages, different time zones, and different orientation. And what is most important in localization and globalization testing is to understand the culture of the country. See, the other day I was reading an article, the content that is okay in United States is actually offensive in China. So that is the kind of, insights that you would want from globalization, localization testing than normally, just translating the page and everything. So a few challenges in localization and globalization testing is that orientation of the text is a problem, and the page might get garbled. The correct translation is a problem. Time zones, the exact time being displayed, is a problem. I'm not sure what example I can give. If you would just go to google.com and try to view the page in Hindi, that's where you are doing the, globalization testing. So, um, yeah, these are the few things that you will have to take into consideration. And for this kind of testing, usually the local language expert is hired because they will be able to tell us the cultural implications of a certain sentence or a certain thing in a better way. But other than that, it's not much to it. So usually the way the globalization part happens, like in the code area, is in the HTML code there's a language tag, and that can be set to any language that you would like. So all those, so when you are actually, looking at translating it to Hindi or Spanish or anything else, it is this language tag that gets invoked in the backend, and you will see the page in different languages. So there's not much to it, just to see that, all of the things that I mentioned. Okay. All right. We are, going over the designated time every day, and I'm sorry for that. I know for some of you it's really late in the night or probably early in the morning. Um, so please excuse me for that. We'll try and stick in the, designated time from next week onwards. But that's all I have from my end today, team. If you have any questions, send them to me. For the next week, I will send you a new invite in a week, in a day or two. I'm trying to work out and get another, go to training account, because this one I faced a lot of voice issues. Hopefully with the next one, we wouldn't have those. So yeah, that's all I had. I'm going to send out the test plan document out today. So if anybody has any questions, you can hang around and ask me, or if you want to just sign off, you can do that. Um, in any case, I'll see you all in the class next week. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a good one. Have a nice week and have a relaxing, productive weekend, everyone. Thank you.